fourth lecture in the head and neck webinar series of the neck module. And today we have Dr. Deepak, who is a very good friend, a senior who has mentored me through my journey in head and neck surgery. So he'll be talking today on classification and rationale of neck dissection. To moderate this session, we have Dr. Samskriti, again a good friend, colleague, who is a ENT trained head neck surgeon. She has done a fellowship from Kidwai, following which she has done a super specialty training, MCH, from Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences. And currently, she's a assistant professor at Kidwai Memorial Institute of Oncology. So, based on the survey, starting the webinar series, we are currently conducting in a bi-weekly manner, and that will be happening on that is Thursday today between 8 to 9, and the second will be on the Saturday between 4 to 5. So this week we have Dr. Krishna Kumar Tankappan, who will be talking on adjuvant therapy in neck metastasis this Saturday between 4 to 5. Please make a note of it and log in to the webinar and have an interactive discussion in that as well. So we also have our YouTube channel where all the recorded webinars will be put up for people who couldn't make it up for the live sessions. We also have live streaming of this webinar series on Facebook, and all the information regarding our HCG Academics is available on LinkedIn, through HCG Academics, Facebook, and Instagram. So I would acknowledge my whole team who has worked tirelessly to make this happen. Dr. Shalini and Dr. Anand, who will be today, who will be coordinating the chat box and helping Samskriti discuss the question with Dr. Deepak, and Bhargav, who is helping us with the technical support in running this program. So over to Samskriti to introduce Dr. Deepak and start the session.
Thanks, Akshay. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to invite Deepak sir to deliver this session. Probably most of you all doesn't need an introduction as such. He's a clinical associate professor at Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences. He completed his head and neck surgery and reconstruction training from Amrita Hospital and Sydney Head and Neck Cancer Institute. I was actually privileged to be trained by him, and his enthusiasm to teach has always motivated us during our training period and even now. Over to you, Deepak sir.
Can you hear me? Is my audio clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
You're audible, sir.
So at the outset, thanks Akshay, and thanks to the entire HCG team. I'm grateful that you've considered me for this presentation. And I'm also grateful that the moderator has taken time off from their schedule to moderate this topic. This is fairly a simple topic to discuss. Most of us would, even in training, have some exposure to what neck dissection is and how it's classified. For those of you who don't know, this might be something new. And for those of you who know, I hope that this refreshes your mind in some ways. Now, what do you need to take away from the presentation is a thorough understanding of cervical lymphatics. What is the relationship between—
Hello, Deepak, sorry, just a minute.
Yeah, actually.
Can you be a little louder and full screen? You can go to the, that way it will look better, I guess.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Is that okay? Akshay, is that okay?
Yeah,
Yes,
perfect,
sir.
perfect.
So we have to understand the anatomy of the cervical lymphatics. We need to understand the relationship of the cervical lymphatics and primary tumors in the head and neck. What are the classifications available for the neck node and their risk of involvement amongst the various sites in the head and neck? The prognostic significance of cervical node involvement from head and neck squamous cell carcinoma, and why we do neck dissection and what is deemed adequate. For all of you trainees, the most important thing that we have in oncology is using evidence. So oncology practice is based on evidence, and study and understand the design of trials or papers or whatever that you do and its outcomes. You transfer the practice to routine clinical care, and in due time you learn what is relevant and not. And as you go along your journey in head and neck, always make it a point to audit your own results and seek for answers in the literature that appears. Now, the one of the main problems, one of the things that we always consider in a head and neck squamous cell carcinoma is that there is always a high risk for cervical lymphadenopathy. If you consider all of the mucosal sites in the head and neck, starting from the nasopharynx all the way up to the hypopharynx, whether the tumor is an early stage tumor or an advanced stage tumor, the risk of nodal metastasis is between 20 to 40%, barring early glottic cancers where the risk is less than 10%. Now, because it's a peculiar problem, the cervical lympometastasis have to be addressed always. So, its effect on survival, it is probably the single most important prognostic factor that decides how well the patient is going to do. The presence of a cervical lymph node at the time of presentation increases the risk of local recurrence and the appearance of distant metastasis. And once the tumor has breached the nodal capsule, what is called extracapsular spread, that also has an important bearing in the outcome because patients who have extranodal spread are more likely to have distant metastasis and local failure. Now, always remember cervical lymphadenopathy is not always clinically or radiologically manifested. Your clinical palpation and your radiological tests may not reveal all the cervical lymph nodes. And these nodes, which are not clinically or radiologically manifested, are called occult lymph nodes. And these occult lymph nodes are a peculiar problem with head and neck squamous cell carcinoma. The presence of occult metastasis, it has the same implication as the above, as an overt clinical node. So it also has a negative prognostic effect on the patients. Now, ECS, extracapsular spread, can be clinically detected or can be pathologically detected. Clinically, ECS is manifested by the node being fixed to these underlying structures like the sternocleidomastoid muscle or to the skin or to the internal jugular vein. But ECS can also be microscopic ECS. So microscopic ECS also has the same adverse features on the prognosis of the adverse effect on the prognosis of the patient. And the problem with head and neck cancers, like I mentioned to you earlier, that even early tumors, that is T1, T2 tumors, especially of the tongue and supraglottis, can metastasize in 20% of the cases. So they have detrimental effects on the prognosis of the patient. They have detrimental effects on the local recurrence and metastasis. The nodes can be occult, meaning they can be only diagnosed with a neck dissection, and even early tumors have a high rate of metastasis. So management of the neck in a head and neck squamous cell carcinoma is inseparable from managing the primary site, meaning that all patients need to have their neck managed either by surgery or by radiation, depending upon what the primary tumor site receives. But not all neck nodes are treated the same. The management of the neck is often decided by the management of the primary site. So if you look at the oral cavity, the primary treatment for oral cavity tumors is surgery. So in these patients, you would address the primary site by a wide excision and you would address the neck by a neck dissection. When you move further posteriorly, for example, oropharynx, larynx, and hypopharynx, stage 1 to stage 3 tumors or T1 to T3 tumors are routinely treated with organ preservation these days. And they would be treated either by single modality radiation or concurrent chemoradiation. Paranasal sinus tumors again are managed by surgery. Salivary gland tumors are again managed by surgery. So it is common. It's a commonly accepted statement that when the risk of nodal metastasis exceeds 20%, the neck needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, in most of the head and neck sites, barring T1, T2 glottis, the risk is more than 20%, and hence all of these patients have to have their neck addressed either by surgery or by radiotherapy. Now, just to give you an example of what a neck node does to the survival of the patient. So this was a paper published in JCO, and I just like to keep the slides simple. Where this is a National Cancer Database analysis, where they had 14,500 odd patients, and they looked at patients who had zero lymph nodes with increasing number of lymph nodes. So the difference between the survival between a patient who had no lymph nodes, there is a 65.3% survival at 5 years if they are node negative, and they're about 50% survival if they have one single lymph node. And this number drastically, the 5-year survival drastically reduces with the increasing metastatic burden. So presence of a single lymph node is bad. And if you have increasing number of lymph nodes, meaning you have an increasing burden of cervical lymphadenopathy, your survival is going to be poor. And this can be seen in the Kaplan-Meier curve as well. Now, the patterns of cervical lymphatic drainage is predictable in most cases. If you have a patient who hasn't been treated before, a patient who hasn't received any sort of radiation or chemotherapy, in those unviolated patients, the lymphatic spread is fairly predictable. And the head and neck has a large number of the lymph nodes, in the largest number of lymph nodes in the human body, about 250 to 300 lymph nodes. The concept, earlier neck dissections used to be radical neck dissections, an operation that was described more than 100 years ago. At that time, the understanding of the facial compartments of the neck weren't very clear. But now, with increasing cadaveric studies and anatomical studies, we understand the facial compartmentalization that exists within the neck. And this forms the basis of doing less radical procedures. And I will come to that in a bit in the subsequent slides. And all of you know that the lymphatics are grouped into the cervical and deep lymph nodes. Now, from a clinical point of view, this is a landmark paper which was published by Professor Shah many years back. And he looked at the data from Memorial Sloan Kettering, where they had done radical neck dissections for a little over 1,000 patients. And the aim of their paper was to prove that in a clinical scenario, the patterns of lymph node metastasis from tumors of the upper aerodigestive tract is quite predictable. So they found out that clinically, levels 1, 2, and 3 were highest risk from the oral cavity, and level 2, 3, 4 do have the highest risk from oropharynx, larynx, and hypopharynx. So this paper sort of started the discussion of compartmentalization of the neck and the move to a less radical procedure. And we also have papers from Tata Memorial with 500 odd patients which have shown similar results. So from the clinical and pathological point of view, assessment of the lymph nodes following a neck dissection has shown predictable patterns of cervical lymph node metastasis. Now, the neck dissection has evolved over the last 100 years or so. The earlier concepts of neck dissection used to be that you remove all of the cervical lymphatics and all of the fascia surrounding the cervical lymphatics, including the non-lymphatic structures. And that used to be the standard operation for many decades. Kreil described it first, and it followed the Halstadian principle of, en bloc resection of tumor. The lymph nodes that are commonly affected are the deep cervical lymph nodes, which lie deep to the sternocleidomastoid muscle. So the concept earlier was, if you have a lymph node present in the neck, you don't try and violate the fascia. You take the fascia along with the structure that it invests and remove the lymph nodes in en bloc fashion. But as you can see from the picture on the right-hand side, there are several problems with the radical neck dissection. In the radical neck dissection, you consider the neck as a region. You don't consider the neck as zones. You don't consider the neck as levels. So you don't put into practice the areas of highest risk and dissect them only, sparing the areas of lower risk. So the entire neck was treated as a region rather than zones. And the removal of the sternocleidomastoid left with a very poor aesthetic outcome. And the removal of the spinal accessory nerve made the patient literally a cripple because of impairment in being able to elevate the arm. And there are so many associated problems with sacrificing the spinal accessory nerve. The shoulder syndrome, which Newman described, has a lot of features to it. Basically, the patient in the end will not be able to bear the weight of their shoulder joint, and this has severe long-term problems. Now, as the radical neck, so when radical neck dissection was done, the common argument for a radical neck dissection was for fixed nodes. So imagine if you have a lymph node in the neck that is attached to the sternocleidomastoid muscle or attached to the sternocleidomastoid muscle and the spinal accessory nerve. The only way that you're going to get oncological clearance is by removing the two non-lymphatic structures. And they sort of extended it to large nodes without fixity. So for many generations, the radical neck dissection was the standard operation, and there was no other operation that they could compare it with to look at oncological outcomes. Following this era of radical neck dissection, Boca and Suarez, they pioneered something called the functional neck dissection. Now, in functional neck dissection, the idea is to use the concept of facial containers. Like if you look at the fascia and the neck has the superficial fascia and the deep fascia. And the deep fascia is again a superficial and a deep fascia by itself. Now, the area that we are concerned is the area between the prevertebral fascia and the sternohyoid or sternothyroid muscle. It is in this space that the deep cervical lymphatics are often present. So functional neck dissection allows you to work and transect these facial planes and protect the underlying vascular, glandular, neural, and muscular structures. So this was against the Halstedian principles or the dogma that everything has to be en bloc. But over time, looking at the results of a modified radical neck dissection, the results were no different for patients who had non-fixed lymph nodes in the neck compared to a radical neck dissection. So in the picture on the left, you see that there is a fascial container between the internal jugular vein, the carotid artery, and the vagus. They are separated within the carotid sheath. And by transecting these facial planes, we are able to remove the lymphatic chain without having any compromise in the oncological outcome. So the facial spaces and the fascia of the head and neck were described in the 1930s. And I urge all the ENT students to read this paper. It's by Grodinski and Holyoke, and they have looked at the different facial compartments, the different fascia. And unless you understand how the fascia invests and wraps, and unless you understand the extent of the fascia, you would not fully understand the implications for a more functional or a selective neck dissection. So this fascia also allows us to separate the lymph nodes into the superficial group of lymph nodes. That is your parotid, your mastoid, your occipital, external jugular, anterior jugular, submental, and submandibular, as well as your deep cervical lymph nodes, which is the internal jugular nodes, the spinal accessory nodes, and the level 5 nodes. So the relationship of the lymph nodes with the fascia is important for you to understand what constitutes the superficial lymphatics and what constitutes the deep lymphatics. And it's not only the clinical studies born out of neck dissection specimens. There have been excellent papers which have used lymphoscintigraphy. This is a paper by Werner published in Head and Neck, where they use lymphoscintigraphy to look at the patterns of drainage of the oral cavity into the lymphatics. And they always follow a predictive pattern. And this forms the basis of allowing us to do functional neck dissections or selective neck dissections compared to a radical neck dissection. So like I mentioned, the biggest change that has occurred between the era of Kreil and the era of Boca is that we understood the neck as levels and not as a region. And this, coupled with predictable patterns of metastasis, gave way to the more functional neck dissections. Now, what are the regions that we are talking about? So when we go in to do a neck dissection, we need to understand that the neck is anatomically divided into different levels. And this anatomical uh, division also corresponds to the type of metastasis or the region of the primary that allows a metastasis in that region. So the neck is divided into 6 zones or 6 levels. We have 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, 3, 4, 5A, 5B, and 6. And they have been given various superior and inferior borders and anterior and posterior borders. Now, understanding this table is important because when you are going in to operate the patient, you must know where your superior, inferior, your medial and lateral limits of dissection end. Now, most of these things are arbitrary. It's quite difficult in TROP to differentiate between a level 2 and a level 3, but this is what we have at the moment. So, because of the studies done with lymphoscintigraphy and other clinical studies, we have been able to group the lymph nodes into levels rather than a region, and we have levels 1 to 6. Now, each level serves an area in the oral cavity, in the head and neck. For example, the submental, submandibular nodes are from the oral cavity, upper jugular nodes are from the oral cavity, oropharynx, hypopharynx, and larynx. The mid-jugular lymph nodes are from the oral cavity, nasopharynx, oropharynx, hypopharynx, larynx. The area 4, which is the lower jugular, is from the hypopharynx, larynx, and cervical esophagus. The posterior triangle that is between the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius is from the nasopharynx and oropharynx. Level 6 is again thyroid gland and larynx, and upper mediastinum is from thyroid, larynx, and lung. So you know the lymph node levels. You always have to look for the primary site so that you can include that lymph node level in your subsequent neck dissection. So you know the primary site, you know its patterns of drainage, you know whether there is a clinical node or an occult node. Then you have to plan the type of neck dissection that you need to do. So the terminologies that we currently employ are radical neck dissection, modified radical neck dissection, selective neck dissections, and extended neck dissection. Now, in a radical neck dissection, you remove all levels, that is 1 to 5, sternocleidomastoid muscle, spinal accessory nerve, and the internal jugular vein. In a modified radical neck dissection, you remove levels 1 to 5, but you preserve at least one of the non-lymphatic structures. In a selective neck dissection, you just preserve one or more lymph node levels, and that can be numbered. You can do a selective 1 to 3, a selective 1 to 4. They can be numbered, but you don't remove any non-lymphatic structures. And when you do an extended neck dissection, you remove lymph node groups that are not part of your conventional nomenclature, or you remove non-lymphatic structures like the hypoglossus or the vagus. So the current terminologies are modified, radical, selective, and extended. And modified has been variously termed as functional or comprehensive neck dissection. Now, so if you have, I mentioned to you that the selective neck dissection is removing a group of lymph nodes, but not removing any of the non-lymphatic structures. And you're selective, that is, you're preserving one or more lymph node groups. So it can be named, and it should be named as SND123 or SND1, 2A, and 3, or SND1B, 2, and 3, and so on and so forth. The common nomenclature for a selective neck dissection 1 to 3 was the supraomohyoid neck dissection. The common nomenclature for a selective neck dissection 2, 3, and 4 was a lateral neck dissection. Selective neck dissection of level 6 was an anterior neck dissection. And if the level 5 was involved, it was called a posterolateral neck dissection. And the indications for them are as shown in the table. So different sites will warrant different types of neck dissections based on their patterns of drainage. So just want to reiterate how the evolution happened. So in the era of radical neck dissection, the popular belief that it was oncologically safe in all patients, even in patients who didn't have fixed nodes but who had large nodes, the popular belief is that you have to follow the Hallstadian principle and remove everything en bloc. So it was just done for virtually every patient who had a neck node at presentation. And at that point of time, when radical neck dissections were done, there were no options to treat extracapsular spread. So if you had a lymph node whose capsule was breached and adherent to the muscle, they did not have adjuvant radiation or chemoradiation in that era, or studies to support it in that era to use them. So ECS became a most major point in allowing people to do a radical neck dissection. And there was a lower awareness of the morbidity caused by a radical neck dissection. So when comprehensive neck dissection became common, the oncological safety was verified in many studies. Like patients who had node positive necks who were treated with a modified radical neck dissection, they had good outcomes. They did not need a radical neck dissection. But the reason why a modified radical neck dissection with level 5 or level 4 was included was that there was an idea that these patients could have a skip metastasis, meaning that they would have a lower neck node involvement, but not a preceding level lymph node or a higher lymph node involvement, and this might prove disastrous for the patient. So they would routinely remove all 5 groups of lymph nodes because of the fear of the skip metastasis. But recent studies have shown that the incidence of skip metastasis is much lower than what was described earlier. In fact, it is less than 2%. Then, when the era of selective neck dissection became popular, the reason for that was that the patterns of lymphatics became better understood. Because we understood the facial spaces, we were not afraid to dissect in the facial spaces, and we were not worried of preserving the non-lymphatic structures. And the selective neck dissection became more and more popular in patients who had an N0 neck, that is clinically and radiologically N0 neck, and became a popular operation for people who had to have an elective neck dissection. And the procedure definitely has less morbidity compared to the comprehensive and the radical neck dissection. So currently we have moved from radical neck dissection to a selective neck dissection, largely based upon the understanding of the drainage patterns, the understanding of the prophylactic indications, and how to minimize morbidity. Now, the next level beyond the indications in neck dissection, or the next step, logical step, is whether we are able to identify the sentinel node or the primary draining node, or can we adequately stage the neck without a full neck dissection. And that is where the sentinel node biopsy has come in. We have trial data now to support its safety in staging the N0 neck. But we still have to do head-to-head comparisons to see its safety in terms of recurrence rates. So currently, sentinel node biopsy is good as a staging procedure to identify whether the patient is node positive or node negative. And this is based on the principle that every tumor has a first echelon node or the sentinel node. And if you pathologically analyze a sentinel node, you will be able to subsequently uh, decide or define whether the rest of the neck has a high chance of harboring nodal metastasis. Now, there are 2 aspects. You've understood the patterns of lymph node metastasis. You've understood the regions from where the lymph node metastasis can occur. You've understood the nomenclature or the levels of neck nodes. You've understood the types of neck dissection and the evolution of neck dissection. The next thing to consider is, when do you do a neck dissection, and what is the type of neck dissection that you would do? So when you do a neck dissection, there are two types. One is the elective neck dissection, where the patient is clinically and radiologically node negative, and the other is a therapeutic neck dissection when the patient has a palpable node or a node is positive on imaging. And the extent of neck dissection can be a radical, modified radical, selective, super selective, or sentinel node. or it can be unilateral neck dissection or a bilateral neck dissection. So the previous era, that is the era prior to the elective neck dissection, everything was done as a therapeutic neck dissection, meaning if the patient presents with nodes, they would operate the nodes. Otherwise, they would not operate the neck. But then slowly, once the patterns of metastasis and the risk of occult metastasis and the appearance, the subsequent appearance of lymph nodes became more clear, more sites in the head and neck were subjected to an elective neck dissection. So if you look at the indications for different types of neck dissections today, so a radical neck dissection would be for fixed nodes with ECS, and it would obviously be a therapeutic neck dissection. A modified radical neck dissection is for a N plus neck, which does not show signs of ECS. And again, it is a therapeutic neck dissection. And selective neck dissection is most commonly recommended for the node negative neck. And it is gaining importance in being a good tool to treat the neck for occult metastasis. And its use is getting more popular in the elective stage. So elective stage meaning the patient has no clinical or radiological evidence of cervical lymph node uh, metastasis. So some common scenarios that you would see. So early oral cavity tumors with no cervical lymphadenopathy. You would still do an elective neck dissection, which is a selective neck dissection. The reason being the oral cavity has a high rate of occult nodal metastasis, more than 20%. So even if the neck is negative, you would do an elective neck dissection, which is a selective neck dissection. If you have an oral cavity tumor with cervical lymphadenopathy, you would do an MRND, which is therapeutic. And if you have a cervical lymph node with fixity, you would do RND and therapeutic. Now, all these clinical scenarios are considering that the primary treatment for the primary tumor is surgery. Otherwise, the neck dissection would follow the primary treatment if the node persists after upfront radiation or chemoradiation. What do you do for non-oral squamous cell carcinoma with lymph nodes? So oral squamous cell carcinoma, it is very clear. You either do an elective for an occult lymph node or for early tumors, or you do a therapeutic for advanced tumors. But what do you do for oral, non-oral SCC with lymph nodes? And the three sites that we commonly encounter as non-oral cavity with lymph nodes is oropharynx, larynx, and hypopharynx. So if you look at the oropharynx, again, the primary treatment now is radiation or chemoradiation. But if you are planning to take the patient up for surgery, the patient you have to evaluate whether the extent of the tumor, the primary site of the tumor, whether it is a base of tongue or whether it's a tonsil tumor. If you have a base of tongue tumor, then your treatment becomes bilateral because the lymph node metastasis cross over and can affect the opposite side. If it's a unilateral tonsil primary, you would do a unilateral neck dissection. Now, in the larynx, the highest rate of lymph node metastasis or occult metastasis is in supraglottic tumors, marginal tumors, tumors of the superior part of the epiglottis and the pre-epiglottic space. And these patients, again, would require a bilateral neck dissection. And in hypopharyngeal tumors, be it postcoracoid or piriform fossa, because of the involvement of the marginal zone, these patients are also at risk for bilateral neck dissection. Now, how much of the neck dissection would you do? That is from the table I showed you before. So it is 2 to 4 for the larynx, and the oropharynx, again, you have to look at whether the level 1B is involved, and then subsequently, make a selective neck dissection that encompasses the regions of risk. So how do you approach the neck? The first step is to assess the primary site. You look at the risk of nodal metastasis, you look at the risk of occult metastasis, you also look at the risk for bilateral metastasis. Then you subject the patient to imaging where you evaluate the complete neck. Now, this is very important because you might find small nodes in level 5, you might find nodes in level 2B, and sometimes you might find suspicious nodes which require further evaluation. So Never look at only the lateral neck. Make a complete evaluation of the different levels in the neck on your imaging. Always look for suspicious contralateral nodes or lower cervical lymph nodes. Following the imaging, you plan the neck dissection. So it is an elective neck dissection based on areas at risk and the risk of occult metastasis for N0 neck. If it is a node positive neck, then an MRND or an RND is warranted, and bilateral neck dissection for tumors which have crossover of lymphatics. Once the neck dissection is done, the pathology report is reviewed. If it is an early primary with node negative, then observation is sufficient. If it is a node positive neck without extracapsular spread, adjuvant RT is sufficient. If it is a node positive neck with extracapsular spread, adjuvant chemoradiation is preferred for further control. Now, it is very clear that therapeutic neck dissection has to be done in patients who have palpable or clinically, radiologically obvious lymph node. So patient has a cervical lymph node, and the obvious treatment for that is to remove the lymph node. So that is therapeutic neck dissection. But elective neck dissection is done when there are no cervical lymph nodes that are obvious clinically or radiologically, and your treatment is purely based on the risk of occult metastasis. So what is the current standing of elective neck dissection? Does elective neck dissection improve outcomes across different sites in the head and neck? Now we have randomized control trial data to support an elective neck dissection in early oral cancers. In the other sites, there are several retrospective studies that also state that elective neck dissection is beneficial for local control and overall outcomes. For example, in supraglottis or in piriform sinus or in base of tongue. But they are not trial data, they are just retrospective data. The reason why patients who are at a high risk of occult metastasis do badly if no neck dissection has been done is that when the neck node reappears, the treatment of the nodal recurrence is often unsatisfactory. And it is because at the time of the recurrence, the node is always at a higher stage. And several meta-analysis and systematic reviews have been done to identify which radiological method is the best for identifying a cervical lymph node on follow-up, because clinical palpation can miss small nodes. So there are problems with accurate follow-up because the patient is subjected to imaging, and that has its own fallacy. So that is an important point. And the elective neck dissection is the only way to pathologically upstage the neck in case with occult metastasis. So a stage 1 tumor undergoing neck dissection, and if you find node positivity, the tumor automatically becomes stage 3 and the patient will receive adjuvant treatment. Unfortunately, if the neck is not addressed, you will never know that the patient was node positive. You'll never know that the patient had stage 3 disease to begin with, and these patients will be understaged and undertreated. So elective neck dissection before the appearance of a clinical or radiological node for the treatment of occult nodal metastasis is proven in oral cavity cancers, and evidence does exist in other tumors which have a high risk of lymphadenopathy, like supraglottis and piriform sinus. And this is the data that was published in NEJM, one of the first surgical, head and neck surgical papers. And they had done a trial looking at elective versus therapeutic neck dissection in node negative oral cancer. And they found out that the patients who had the elective neck dissection had better overall survival and disease-free survival. And this was subsequently proven in the hospital and community setting by Ian Hutchison from the UK, and they had replicated the study, the results of the Tata Memorial study. So the results are neck node dissection or elective neck dissection improves local control, and it improves overall survival. Now, there are some lingering questions when it comes to the neck dissection and its use. A lot of authors and a lot of surgeons have published papers that a selective neck dissection is sufficient for node positive necks, even for necks which have N2 nodal disease. But from a trial point of view, that has never been proven. And from an examination or answering in an exam, I would still be reluctant to say selective neck dissection is sufficient for node positive necks. But for single nodes without adverse pathological features on imaging, maybe a selective neck dissection is sufficient. Otherwise, our answer should be that for a node positive neck, MRND is the answer or treatment of choice. When do you dissect level 2B and level 5? Is it mandatory in all cases? The reason why this question comes up is that the dissection of level 2B and 5 do have morbidity associated with spinal accessory nerve. Now, there are several studies and there are several meta-analyses which have been published. The conclusions have not been very robust, but I would still do a level 2B and a level 5 depending on the site of the primary. And especially if your level 2A is positive, you do a level 2B. If you have nodes when you're in introp, if you find lymph nodes in level 2A, you would do a level 2B. And if you find a node in level 4, you would do a level 5 as well. So that decision is based intraoperatively. And until we get more robust data, we may not be able to answer that question. What is the role of elective neck dissection in non-oral squamous cell carcinoma? Again, we don't have trials, but as I mentioned to you, some sites which have a high risk of occult metastasis, like supraglottic larynx, piriform sinus, base of tongue oropharynx, all of these sites do require an elective neck dissection even when they're node negative. And can sentinel lymph node become standard of care? There are several aspects to sentinel lymph node that preclude its use for becoming standard of care because it requires technique, it is cost involved. If the sentinel node is positive, you have to take the patient back for a second operation to do a formal neck dissection. So there are several aspects of sentinel neck node biopsy which are still, being worked out. And maybe in the future, it might become the standard of care. I urge all of you to download this free article published by Vineet Talleri. It was in JLO in 2016, and it was the UK guidelines of the management of neck metastasis and head and neck cancer. They talk about managing the N plus neck, the N0 neck, the choice of imaging. When do you do an elective? When do you do a therapeutic? What is the role of salvage neck dissections? It is a very comprehensive paper. It's free for download. And I would suggest all of you to download this article and give it a read because it's worth. So in conclusion, neck metastasis affects outcomes adversely. And the neck node metastasis occurs in a predictable fashion. Neck dissection is indicated by the primary tumor site. The extent of neck dissection is based on the nodal drainage pattern. We have moved from radical to more functional and selective neck dissections. And considering the high incidence of occult nodal metastasis in head and neck squamous cell carcinoma, management of the neck is of prime importance. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Sir, we have quite a few questions. I think most of them have been partially answered in your presentation. I've combined a couple of questions. So most common question is regarding bilateral neck dissection. So they want to know what the indications for bilateral neck dissection are, and if yes, what could be the extent of contralateral dissection?
So you do a bilateral neck dissection when the primary tumor is in the midline, because the midline tumors tend to drain to both sides of the neck. So if you have a floor of mouth tumor, or if you have a tongue tumor that is crossing the midline, or if you have a base of tongue tumor crossing the midline, these are indications for a bilateral neck dissection. Now, this answer is for the side of neck dissection. Next is the extent of neck dissection. If your imaging or clinical examination reveals a lymph node, then on that side it is a modified radical neck dissection. And on the side where it is an N0 neck clinically and radiologically, you would do a selective neck dissection. So the bilaterality of the neck dissection depends upon the anatomical location of the site of the primary, and also the risk of contralateral metastasis from that site. See, for example, supraglottic tumors, even though they are lateralized, can still have bilateral neck node metastasis. So bilaterality depends on the midline location and some cases like supraglottic larynx. And the extent of neck dissection is based on whether they are node negative or node positive. The site that is node positive requires a MRND, and the site that is node negative requires a selective neck dissection.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. They want to know how to manage neck in maxillary sinus tumors.
Right. So in maxillary sinus tumors, there is always a contention because there have been studies going back and forth looking at the rates of occult metastasis. So the more anterior a maxillary sinus tumor is, that is, tumor involving the skin or tumor coming to the nasal vestibule, wherever there is epithelia, those areas, anteriorly placed maxillary tumors, have a higher risk of nodal metastasis. Now, for an early maxillary sinus tumor, that is T1 and T2, which is clinically and radiologically node negative, you might just want to keep the neck under observation. But the problem is most of the tumors are T3 and T4, and most of the tumors do breach the anterior wall of the maxillary sinus and have extension beyond that. So advanced maxillary sinus tumors, I would recommend doing a neck dissection, even if it's selective. For very small early maxillary tumors, the neck can be observed.
So with your permission, I would like to add another indication for elective neck dissection in maxillary sinus tumors is probably extensive involvement of the hard palate. They do have a higher rate of occult metastasis. And one more question is, what would be your treatment plan in metastasis of unknown origin?
So in metastasis of unknown origin, there are several factors that we have to consider. You will have to try to find the probable site of the primary, and that can be inferred by the level of neck node that is involved. And now with the advent of the biological imaging and PET CT scan, the uh, detection of the primary site has more or less you can more or less detect the primary site. Usually MUOs today are either from the tonsil or from the base of tongue, and they are usually HPV positive tumors. So in a patient who's got an MUO, the current treatment of choice is giving the patient RT or chemoradiation, depending upon the extent of the node, its relationship to the surrounding structures, and what the tumor board decides. And you also include the probable sites of the primary, starting from the skull base to the larynx. You look at the probable sites of the primary. Now, the question has always been whether you do whole mucosal radiation or partial mucosal radiation. If you can decide which is your primary site, either by doing a P16 status on the node or by doing EBV status on the node, or you can do a multiple blind biopsies and come to the conclusion of a primary site, or FDG shows a primary site tumor. In those cases, the mucosal radiation can be limited to one site, and you don't have to do whole mucosal radiation. But a lot of centers still continue to do bilateral mucosal radiation, and we don't have clear answers whether that is better or not, because the numbers in each of these papers is fewer. So in my book, I would like to find the site of the primary, try to get a primary biopsy or a PET scan, do ancillary tests on the lymph node to see the site of primary, and then treat unilaterally as much as possible. But if the site of primary is in the midline, or we find out that the biopsy is positive in the base of tongue, then the patient would go in for bilateral mucosal radiation.
Okay, so one of probably a more pathological and a theoretical question: how do skip metastasis occur?
Well, I don't think there has been a definition why a skip metastasis occurs, or a pathological rationale for a skip metastasis. I don't know, but the risk of skip metastasis is less than 2%, and in some studies it is non-existent. So I would think that concept in things in a current management of uh, head and neck is probably uh, overstated. I think the current risk of thing is overstated. Hello. Hello.
Hello. I think we just lost Samskriti. Samskriti, are you there? Hello, Deepak.
Hello,
I will.
I can hear
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Please go on, Samskriti.
Okay, one of the first questions that came in was, do we follow echelon pattern of drainage when planning neck dissection?
The echelon pattern of drainage is always for the first echelon alone, and the echelon pattern of drainage is for the first echelon nodes alone, because that is the one of the principles behind the sentinel lymph node biopsy. But the further drainages, like for example from level 2 to 3, level 3 to 4, they've all been proven by anatomical studies. So I don't think it is the echelon pattern. You follow you plan your neck dissection in that order. So yes, we use the echelon pattern for planning our neck dissection. But echelon usually is reserved for the first node that is affected by the tumor.
Okay, so there are two specific clinical scenarios: management of neck in T1 disease and T3N1 tongue.
Both of them need neck dissection. Even if it's a small T1 tongue tumor, you would still do an elective neck dissection because of survival benefits. Whereas a T3N1 tongue, you would do a modified radical neck dissection, which is therapeutic. So for an oral cavity, the neck dissection is mandatory.
Okay, so probably two recent questions that they've asked is on management of recurrent neck disease, how to identify neck recurrence, and how to treat, especially if it is less than 6 months of completed treatment.
Can you please repeat the question?
The two recent questions are on recurrent neck disease, how to identify neck recurrence and how to manage neck recurrence, especially if it is less than 6 months of completion of treatment.
So identification of neck recurrence, you have to use a combination. It depends on what primary treatment you had given. If the primary treatment was chemoradiation, you have to give the patient 12 weeks to reassess the neck in the form of a PET CT scan. If the patient shows residual neck node, then you would have to go in and perform a neck dissection. And this neck dissection usually ends up being a modified radical neck dissection. Now, if a patient has been disease-free and the patient has developed recurrence at 6 months, it is a bad sign. The shorter the interval between the primary tumor and the appearance of the neck node or local recurrence, signifies that the tumor is very aggressive. In most instances, when the tumor comes back, they will be fixed. There will be N3 nodes. There will be nodes with ECS. So in those cases, you would still attempt surgery, but you might end up with a radical neck dissection, and you might end up needing a carotid cover with the pectoralis major muscle to facilitate healing. So the recurrence is bad. And for those who are treated with chemoradiation, you do a PET CT scan at 3 months.
Okay. So one more question is role of supraomohyoid neck dissection, and how does it compare with MRND in a therapeutic neck dissection setting?
So like I said, there are several articles which have published, which have looked at the efficacy of selective neck dissection when compared to MRNDs for node positive necks. And all of them have been favorable. Most of them have said that for node positive necks, selective neck dissection is sufficient. But this is always combined. If the selective neck dissection shows adverse pathological features, we must always combine the neck dissection with post-operative radiation if the node is positive or the node is showing adverse pathological features. And this has the same outcomes as MRND. So there's a lot of evidence pointing towards that. We don't have trial data, but in a lot of centers, that is what is practiced also. Even if the patient is node positive, we would do a 1 to 3 or 1 to 4. In Amrita, that's what we do. And we have not found it to we have not found it to adversely affect the outcomes.
Thank you, sir. One more question. I'm combining two questions here. They want to know why only 3 structures are removed or spoken about during neck dissection, and can cervical plexus and supraclavicular nerves be saved during neck dissection?
So why these 3 structures are usually mentioned is that, first of all, there is a group of lymph nodes which are along these structures, and the deep fascia invests these structures. So earlier it was thought that you have to remove the lymph node along with its facial envelope. So they removed the IJ and the spinal accessory and the sternocleidomastoid, because the tumor is usually anatomically present in that location, and the common facial plane envelops these 3 structures. Resection of the carotid does not make sense, nor does resection of the vagus, because the area that we are concerned is usually between the scalene muscle and the sternothyroid muscle. So that is why these 3 non-lymphatic structures were often described. And in those days, when patients came with N2 or N3 node, they were usually in level 2, where there is a confluence of the IJV, spinal accessory, as well as the upper end of the sternocleidomastoid. That's how these patients used to present. So that is why these 3 structures became important. And what was the second question?
Can cervical plexus and supraclavicular nerves be preserved?
Cervical plexus have to be preserved in all cases of selective neck dissection. And the supraclavicular nerves, again, can be tried. You can try to preserve it, but sometimes during the dissection of level 5, you'll have to dissect in between the fat to get the nerves out. The problem with the supraclavicular nerve, there are 3 supraclavicular nerves. The nerve transection leads to anesthesia over the clavicle and the upper part of the chest. So if you have large nodes in level 5 and you want to take out the nodes en bloc without dissecting out the supraclavicular nerves, oncologically, I think that is right. Otherwise, you can dissect between the nerves and lift off the fascial and fatty tissue. And the other problem is the cervical plexus, again, have to be preserved in selective neck dissection. But when doing a radical neck dissection, usually when we lift the fascia off the posterior triangle and pull it under the SCM anteriorly, sometimes you end up transecting some of those fibers. So you can preserve them as well if you dissect between the nerves. Otherwise, you might end up transecting. All this is in context of whether there is a large node present there or not. Do not dissect the node away from the facial tissue just to preserve the plexus. But certainly the plexus and the supraclavicular nerves can be preserved if there is no obvious nodes in that area.
So there's a question on adjuvant therapy. I think that will be covered in the next session probably. They want to know what is the role of super selective neck dissection in salvage setting.
So super selective neck dissection is you remove one neck node and the adjacent level. If you have a patient who has had an MUO and he's had chemoradiation, or if you've had a patient who's had chemoradiation for another head and neck primary and presents with a single lymph node, which is pathologically FNA positive and positive on FDG, then you can limit your neck dissection to on that lymph node and the adjacent group of lymph nodes. Again, not many large series of papers. I would still do a selective neck dissection if the patient comes back with a node recurrence following chemoradiation. But it's basically trying to minimize the morbidity of even the selective neck dissection, where only two groups of nodes are removed. But again, not much evidence to strongly support it.
So the next question is on can central compartment be negative in thyroid cancer when the lateral nodes are positive?
So usually it is a very difficult question to answer because the central compartment has a very wide area of what you would call the central compartment. So all of us, when there is a lateral compartment involvement, we always tend to explore the central compartment also. So, when you have a lateral compartment involvement, I think exploring the central compartment for nodal disease and excising them is probably the right answer to give. You cannot categorically say that if you have lateral lymph nodes, you will definitely have central compartment lymph nodes. But if you have lateral lymph nodes, I will be more keen to do a central compartment clearance also in that patient.
Okay, so the couple of questions related to follow-up protocol after management of neck.
So after management of neck, there are no universal guidelines. We just follow clinical examination in the form of clinical palpation, monthly for the first year, twice monthly for the second year, 3 monthly, third year, and then you can make it 6 monthly and yearly after that. If the neck is supple and you're able to feel the underlying structures, clinical examination should be sufficient. But if the neck is fibrosed and there are several post-radiation changes, you might be better off doing serial ultrasounds. And it also depends upon what pathological stage the patient was. If the patient was N0 in their primary surgery and had adequate number of lymph nodes excised during the primary surgery, then you would rest easy. You would not think too much about the nodal recurrence. But if the patient had advanced primary tumor and was node positive in the neck dissection, they are more with ECS. They are more likely for nodal recurrences. So in this group of patients, you might want to do 3 monthly ultrasounds just to rule out neck recurrence. And this probably can continue for the first year or the first 2 years because that is when the risk is the highest.
Okay, so the next question is on can radiotherapy be primary modality of treatment when the node is positive? The question doesn't mention of any subsite or so, it's just a general question.
So lymph nodes generally don't do well with radiation. If you're trying to treat the primary with surgery and a positive lymph node with radiation, the results are bad. We have 1 or 2 studies which have looked at the cure rates of treating the primary with surgery and treating the neck with radiation. The results were very bad. There are some sites like the supraglottis, oropharynx, which even with large lymph nodes, if you treat the area with primary radiation or chemoradiations, the nodes resolve. So it is site-wise. For the oral cavity, the response of nodes to primary radiation is bad. For non-oral sites like nasopharynx, oropharynx, and supraglottis, the response to radiation, both to the primary and to the node, is good. So I wouldn't do external beam radiation on a node positive patient when the primary requires surgery. So the results are quite bad.
This is the last question for today. They want to know what is the process of selective neck dissection.
What is the?
Sorry, process for sentinel node biopsy.
So the sentinel node biopsy, what you have to do is there are two ways of doing the sentinel node biopsy. One is by dye injection technique, and the second is by lymphoscintigraphy. So the aim is you circumferentially infiltrate the primary tumor either with a dye or with a radio tracer. If it's a dye alone, when you open the neck, you would be able to see the bluish dye in the neck, which is the first echelon node. And the problem with using the dye is you don't have any orientation of where the node is from the skin aspect. You still have to make the wide neck incision to identify the blue colored node. So it has largely been replaced with lymphoscintigraphy, where you inject radio tracers. And once you inject the radio tracer around the tumor, you take the patient to the theater and you use a handheld gamma probe. And then you place the gamma probe on the neck to see where you get the they will mark it. In fact, the nuclear physicians will mark it because they will do a SPECT scan also. So they will mark it in the neck for you on the skin. And then you go into theater, you take a gamma probe, and then you place the gamma probe on where the nuclear medicine physicians have marked the node on the skin. You make a small incision, you dissect out the lymph node, and you place the gamma probe again on the lymph node to get its count. So it should be a higher count than the adjacent normal tissue. And then you subject this lymph node to pathological evaluation, especially serial step sectioning with immunohistochemistry. Now, this forms one part of the procedure. So if the sentinel node that you have done is negative, the rest of the neck need not be addressed, can be kept under follow-up, because it is usually the first echelon node that gets affected by the tumor. But if the first echelon node is positive, you have to do a completion neck dissection because you don't know the status of the other neck node. So lymphoscintigraphy is the technique that we follow today.
Thank you, sir. There's a last minute question based on management of an N3 node in oral cavity cancer.
So if the patient has an oral cavity cancer N3 node, his survival is very bad, probably less than 12 months, because an N3 node of NCS means that the patient is at high risk for distal metastasis, either at a presentation or on subsequent follow-up. And the patient, generally the disease burden is high. So you would address it as any other patient. You would do a primary wide local excision and you would do a radical neck dissection on the neck, and then give the patient post-op chemoradiation. Now, if the question is whether we can give induction chemotherapy and then operate, I don't think there is any evidence to suggest that. We don't do that. It is common practice in the community to give the patient induction chemo to reduce the size of the node, to make the node more operable. There is no evidence for that. People haven't published anything like that. But if the N3 node is operable, you would operate the N3 node. But if it has got circumferential more than 270 involvement of carotid, if it's involving the prevertebral space or any of the other things, then the patient probably will go into a palliative treatment rather than a curative treatment.
Thank you, sir. I think we are done with questions. It was a brilliant and a comprehensive presentation. I would also like to thank the HCG team and Akshay for putting this together, which is actually extremely helpful for most of the postgraduates. It's a great learning experience to hear from people from across the country. Thanks. And Akshay, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Samskruti.
Akshay, you there?
Yeah, I am there.
Yeah.
Thanks, Samskruti. It was very well. You moderated the session very well, and I had a very interacting discussion with Deepak. Thanks, Deepak, for a wonderful presentation and comprehensive discussion on this topic. Looking forward for future help in this teaching series as well going forward.
I just had put up the
Sure.
skip metastasis paper. Did you see that, Akshay?
Which paper?
I had put up the skip metastasis paper.
Yeah. We did see that. Yeah, we did see that.
So that was, everybody has based their questions based on biases. Skip metastasis paper. Just to add that his paper was not very good from a presentation point of view, because he found close to 16% of skip metastasis, but his inclusion exclusion criteria was bad. But subsequent papers on level 4, level 5 involvement have shown it to be less than 2% if the upper level lymph nodes are not involved. So there is no real description of the reason why people get skip metastasis, and I don't think that the skip metastasis should be the reason to do a level 5 in a patient who's level 4 in a patient who's node negative also. So I just wanted to put up that for people to see that that was the paper that started it off.
Yeah. Thanks. And thanks again, Deepak, for the wonderful teaching. Then we have on the Saturday, we have a talk on adjuvant therapy in neck metastasis by Dr. Krishna Kumar Tankapan, and the session will be moderated by Dr. Vivek Shetty from Majumdar Shah Cancer Center. Looking forward for everyone to join that session and learn from it. Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.